My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power.
2 days after the violence at the U.S. Capitol, President Trump talks about a peaceful transfer of power while politicians discuss the possibility of impeaching him once again. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Tensions remain high here in Washington, D.C. A Capitol police officer died as a result of Wednesday's attack by pro-Trump mob, the fifth death caused by the riots. Thursday night, President Donald Trump released a video conceding that Joe Biden will be the next president. But Friday morning, he tweeted that he won't be attending the inauguration ceremony on January 20th, breaking a long-standing tradition. And the U.S. Congress is discussing another impeachment effort against Trump for inciting violence. To discuss these events, let's bring in our panel, all based here in Washington, D.C. Dan Raviv is a journalist and columnist for Newsday. Ryan O'Donovan is the Washington correspondent for RTE News. Via Skype, Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist, and Steve Chaggaris, also via Skype, is a political analyst. I want to thank all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Dan, we're seeing resignations. We are seeing an appeal for enactment of the 25th Amendment. The Wall Street Journal is out with an editorial saying that Trump should resign. GOP Senator Lisa Murkowski also saying the same thing today. She wants him to resign. The House now moving forward with an impeachment effort again. This is so rapid. Have you ever seen anything quite like this? You've been in Washington for a while.
Yeah, well, over 20 years, Mike, and good to see you, of course. Well, no, it's totally unusual, but of course, Donald Trump has been an unconventional president, in many ways proud of bending the lines, maybe even breaking the rules, and he's been impeached once by the House of Representatives, controlled by Democrats. Of course, then it goes to the United States Senate, which, if it would vote by a two-thirds majority, would remove Mr. Trump from office. Not likely to happen, but it could. But keep in mind, he'll be out of office a week from Wednesday. It's all symbolic. The Democrats especially feel they want to punish President Trump for inciting the unprecedented violence at the Capitol building. We'll have to see how many Republicans might want to join this effort, Mike.
Steve, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin says he's against it. He says the Republicans are still in control of the Senate. But you have Republican Senator Ben Sasse saying today he'd consider impeachment. The timetable, as Dan just pointed out, not great. But a lot of Democrats are saying, look, even if it goes past his time in office, they can vote on this, and he may not be able to return to Washington. What's the strategy here?
Well, the strategy, first and foremost, is to punish the president. I think that many members of Congress, mostly Democrats at this point, but Republicans are saying this kind of action, this kind of behavior cannot go unpunished. And so there's not a lot Congress can do. They could impeach, they could censure, or there's this 25th Amendment situation, which involves the cabinet and Vice President Pence, who says he doesn't want to be involved with that right now. So really, Congress can only do so much. And at this point, they figure that the one thing they can do is impeach. The House can pass that probably pretty easily because Democrats in the House are united behind that idea. And as Dan mentioned, it's going to be tough to get that through the Senate to get two-thirds of a vote. But at least they are making a case and at least publicly holding the president's feet to the fire to what at least Democrats think is something that is so beyond the pale that it can't go unanswered.
And Adolfo, Trump released this video last night aimed at his supporters. Let's watch just a little bit of it.
To all of my wonderful supporters, I know you are disappointed, but I also want you to know that our incredible journey is only just beginning.
You would deduce from that he wants to stay in the political game, perhaps keep the door open on 2024. Can he even consider that at this point?
Well, he has a huge movement, and yes, he could theoretically. There are a couple of things. One is just the clock. I realize that in 4 years he'll be Joe Biden's age, but that's been an issue, frankly, in this campaign, and I think actually will be more of an issue in the next 2 or 3 years. So that he has age against him, and a lot can happen in the next 4 years. I think the president is going to be embroiled in a lot of personal lawsuits and actions that are already ongoing at the state level in New York, at least. So that's going to be a problem. But there's another problem for the president, and that's the following. Although the emotions and the passions of the moment, like everything, will abate, and conspiracy theories will come forward, and already we have an allegation, for example, that this fellow John Sullivan, a member of Antifa, has been identified as being in that building. As this builds, it will only solidify the opposition to the actions you've just described here. I think that would be the worst thing to impeach or remove the president, or to do anything to try to curtail him from leading a movement forward. I think it would only fuel it and divide the country further. And I also think that for Republicans, what's going to happen is, if that does indeed happen, a good chunk of the Republican success is owed to Donald Trump and to all these voters that have never identified as Republicans. So it's playing with fire for Republicans and for Democrats if they overplay their hand.
But to just kind of follow up, we had a guest on last night saying the Republican Party is going to face a civil war over this. There's reporting in the Washington Post. Mitch McConnell says he never plans to ever speak to Trump ever again. Pat Toomey the other night called him a demagogue. You're seeing kind of this break within the party. There were a lot of angry Republican senators that Josh Hawley was going to object earlier this week. They thought it was dangerous. They've lost the House, they've lost the Senate, they've lost the White House. Where is the Republican Party moving forward?
Well, the problem for the Republican Party, this all sounds very nice, but the fact is we picked up a significant number of House seats, which was unexpected. The predictions before the election is that we would have lost far more seats than we had, and a lot of this is attributed to President Trump being able to hold on in places, for example, our seats, Senate seats in Iowa and North Carolina. Again, if you alienate the Trump base, it's a little bit like alienating the Tea Party. That's fine. The Republican Party is then now reduced by a third. And good luck with the demographics in the country and where the Democratic Party, which is a growing party, good luck on getting your majority. In many ways, this is a coalition that, meaning bringing in the MAGA movement, if you call it that. Hopefully that can be tamed, but I don't think that the conventional Republicans can divorce themselves successfully without paying a huge price.
Steve, let me ask you a question about what Adolfo just said, because I don't see how it translates. I mean, the midterms with Trump not on the ballot, it didn't really help the Republicans. Trump wasn't on the ballot in Georgia this week. It didn't help those two Republican candidates. If Trump isn't on the ballot, is there somebody who can carry the Trump mantle? I mean, he's kind of a unique character.
Yeah, there's two things I want to say. First of all, we can't assume that the 75 million people who voted for Donald Trump in November are the same 75 million people after they saw what happened this week. We don't know the answer to that question yet. We haven't seen any polling of the sentiment of Republicans or supporters of Donald Trump, whether there's any change in their minds about what happened on Wednesday. So we don't really know that automatically the 75 million people that supported Donald Trump, that voted for him, automatically translates after what happened this week. This could be a game changer. We don't know. We're going to have to watch that very closely. The other thing, too, is Georgia, I think, was a game changer as well, in the sense that there was a massive fear factor that Donald Trump laid out for Republicans. Basically, what Donald Trump said is, if you are not on board with me, I'm going to primary you, I'm going to tweet negative things about you, and I'm going to ruin your political career. I think after what happened on Tuesday, in which both Republicans lost the day after Donald Trump was in Georgia campaigning for them, I think a lot of Republicans saw that and said, well, wait a minute now. So this guy, is threatening our political careers, yet he goes out there to help these people, and they didn't win. So you had that on Tuesday. You have the riots on Wednesday. I think there are a lot of Republicans who are asking the question, is he as much of a threat? Should we be as fearful of him politically as we were before this week? I think we'll see what happens as the months and years come along here, but it seems, at least the initial reaction is, they're not as fearful after all of this.
And Brian, the world was watching these images of this mob attack earlier this week. Give us a sense of how world leaders are responding to all of this.
A lot of the reaction came swift and fast, some of it quite negative, some of it pointedly aimed at Donald Trump. Our own Taoiseach, Prime Minister Micheál Martin, was tweeting about this, saying that the world was watching with dismay. His Foreign Affairs Minister, Simon Coveney, very much pinning the blame on Donald Trump for all of this. And it was fascinating to watch. I was down there myself outside the Ellipse, outside the White House, when Donald Trump called on his supporters to march to the Capitol building. He told them, "I'll be there with you." Of course, he was never going to be there with them. And he spoke about fighting and fighting to keep your country. And then we saw the chaos that ensued down at the Capitol building, and I was there then reporting for that, a little bit at a remove, but as the protesters were leaving and moving away, huge amount of anger and animosity aimed towards the media. I'm used to that. I've been covering Donald Trump for the last 3 years, but usually it's just words, and they'll shout and they'll roar at you, fake news, fake news. What we saw on Wednesday night was those words being turned into violence, being turned into chaos, and I felt it marked a very dark chapter in the last few days of the Trump presidency.
And one of the things, someone shared the Times of India's headline, Ku Klux Klan, and it was spelled C-O-U-P. And we're also seeing a lot of these jokes that Mexico is now going to build the wall because of what happened in Washington. This is a pretty big black eye for the U.S. and American exceptionalism in a way, isn't it?
I think one of the biggest world leader comments that everybody focused in on was from Turkey, President Erdogan, expressing his concerns about democracy being under threat in America. I mean, this was an unprecedented moment. And everybody watching those scenes of chaos play out. And I think what was most jarring and most upsetting, we're used to seeing protesters rattling with the police and clashing and the tear gas and the whatever else. What was most striking was the lack of that. We didn't see the tear gas. We didn't see the battles. We didn't see the push. We saw them wandering in. And they strolled through the corridors of power, through the heart of American democracy. They vandalized. They ripped things off the wall. They took selfies. They wore silly costumes. All the while security guards were barricading doors, weapons drawn, and members of Congress hiding under desks. It truly was one of the most bizarre incidents we've ever seen here in the US, and as I say, a dark stain at the end of what was a presidency full of controversy and full of shocks and full of surprises. This really, really was a striking set of images to end Donald Trump's term in the White House.
And Dan, these shocking images, some of the images that really hit people hard were watching some of the officers helping people down the stairs, that people were allowed to leave. People weren't arrested. Now they are rounding up people and arresting them, but that also came as a bit of a shock.
Well, a lot of what takes place in the field of security is the day after, right? The authorities make a big mistake, and that obviously occurred on Wednesday. There will be hearings, there will be investigations. Already the police chief at the Capitol building and grounds has resigned, as have other officials involved with security there. Now we have National Guard troops and police all around the Capitol building, because that's where, a week from Wednesday, Joe Biden is to be sworn in as president and Kamala Harris as vice president. So the authorities will make sure, they say, that nothing bad will happen then. Among the questions, whether any of the police actually were sympathetic toward these pro-Trump demonstrators who became rioters. Did the police let them in intentionally? Again, questions to be asked. Everyone in Washington hopes this will never happen again, but let's be honest here, those who do hope that there will still be a Trump movement in the future, they're kind of proud that on Wednesday they did something unprecedented and took over part of the Capitol building.
Steve, one of the images that we saw over and over again was this bare-chested individual. He had horns, his face was painted. He's been identified as Nick Angeli. He's the QAnon shaman is what he calls himself. And one of the guys who has been investigating QAnon for some time, Travis View, he's been looking at them for years, says that actually Trump has recognized the QAnon community in a way they never could have even fantasized about. And one of the tenets of this group is that there's a deep state cabal, a pedophile elitists who are doing unspeakable evil, and they're trying to undermine Trump. It sounds like crackpot stuff, but there was a poll in September that found 56% of Republicans believe that QAnon is mostly or partly true. Talk to us about this element of the Republican Party, and how does the party move forward and kind of shake these kind of elements? We also saw the people with the Confederate flags.
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's something they're going to have to wrestle with. I think we saw a little bit of this, and the difficulty that Republicans are going to have dealing with this. When we saw the vote for the electoral vote to certify Joe Biden's victory the other night, you had about 7 or 8 senators, Republican senators, who voted to object to Vice President Biden's electoral votes in a couple of states. And on the House side, you had about 120 to 140. That's a lot of Republicans in the House that believe that the election was rigged or tainted or it was illegitimate, whatever word you want to use. Who knows what other conspiracy theories they're buying into, but if the election is a conspiracy theory they're buying into, there's a significant number of Republicans just in Congress, especially in the House. And you've got leaders like Mitch McConnell on the Senate side who want to move past all of this. As you mentioned earlier, he doesn't want to speak to Donald Trump anymore. Well, I don't know how they're going to wrestle with that. It's not like there aren't a few people that you have to deal with. There are over 100 on the House side alone who are dealing with this. Again, they're not all pro-QAnon, but they are buying into conspiracy theories where there's absolutely zero evidence of what they're buying into. And so, it's going to be really difficult to figure out how they move forward in the short term. And in the long term, they're going to have to wrestle their leaders, whoever wants to run for president, whoever is going to be up for re-election in 2022 in Congress. They're going to have to wrestle with these issues, and really it's going to define what the party looks like moving forward.
And Adolfo, how do they wrestle with this?
Well, first of all, I'd say Steve is spot on what he just said, but it makes my point. You have probably 140 House members, and really, frankly, even though some of them didn't end up objecting, you probably have 10 to 15 senators who share the Trump movement, the Trumpism, if you want to call it that. That's not going away. I have to disagree with the other guest. Of course, 74 million people, if you took a poll today, are not going to be with the president. You're going to have the conventional establishment Republicans who supported him peel away. But what's left is still a formidable number of people that aren't extremists, that believe in the agenda, that are on the right, there's no question, and that form part of this movement. And that is going to translate in the long run into either a split in the Republican Party and a third party emerge that will be more of the far right, and then the conventional Mitch McConnell party, which is by itself, I think, doomed to be a minority party. The same could be said eventually about the Democratic Party, with the socialist element of it and the more moderate Democrats. So this is a challenge, but this idea, and especially after this becomes past the Trump presidency ends, this movement will continue forward in the Republican Party, and it's a question of if it can be tamed and led by the likes of a Senator Hawley, for example, or Senator Cotton. That's really going to be the test for Republicans.
But Dan, one of the speeches the other night from Mitt Romney, the senator from Utah, was, we need to be responsible. We need to tell the truth. And yet these conspiracy theories, I mean, there's really not many shreds of truth there. And that's a big part of the problem, isn't it?
Well, it depends which conspiracy we're talking about. And I mean that, I know I'm almost saying something controversial, that there could be any truth in any of the complaints made by Senator Hawley or Senator Cruz. You thought of them as Trump loyalists, still after the violence on Wednesday, hours afterward on the Senate floor, they were still claiming that there was fraud, that there was cheating in the election, as though it wasn't legitimate that Biden won, though, on the sides they'd say, hey, we know there's not time to change the results. The trouble is, if you look at it really as an intellectual, you try to be fair, there must have been some cheating here and there in some cities, someone fraudulent, etc. But again, authorities have looked. Courts have looked. The Trump campaign claims that went to 60 courts, including the Supreme Court of the United States, were turned away in every case but one. There was a little cheating, maybe. There always is in any election in any country. But that's the big conspiracy theory, as though Biden won by cheating. And if millions of Americans believe that, it's going to make it a little bit harder for Joe Biden to unite the country, even a lot harder against the background of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we need some unity for people to step up, get the vaccinations, and also socially separate and wear masks.
Brian, we mentioned earlier that President Trump is not going to attend Biden's inauguration. That's breaking a long-standing tradition. I mean, it's one of the things that we always see every 4 years. We saw it with Obama inviting Trump into the White House. The two of them go to the Capitol. Today, Joe Biden was asked about this, and he had some comments about Trump and his decision.
I've been saying for now well over a year He is not fit to serve. He is not fit to serve. He's one of the most incompetent presidents in the history of the United States of America. So I think it's important we get on with the business of getting him out of office. The quickest way that that will happen is us being sworn in on the 20th. I was told that on the way up here, way over here, that he indicated he wasn't going to show up at the inauguration. One of the few things he and I have ever agreed on.
So, Brian, is this another blow to, this image of America as this beacon of democracy and this tradition? How is this going to be viewed?
I think the divisions that we're seeing in America really over the last few months are unprecedented, but I suppose we can trace it back to the start of the Donald Trump legacy. Remember, he's always been a divider rather than a unifier. If you look at his 2016 campaign, there was always an enemies. There's always us versus them. It was keep out the Mexicans, keep out the Muslims. Then when the coronavirus hit, it was China's fault. Then when we saw the Black Lives Matter movement take to the stage over the summer months, he very much focused on the negative parts, the radical mobs tearing down monuments and the marauding packs of violent people that could come to your neighborhood. That's always been the Donald Trump way, to divide, to have an enemy, to have an us versus them. And when he lost his election, the enemy was the Democrats from the perspective of they stole it, they cheated, and he went down this route. And you look back over 4 years of Donald Trump, he ticked a lot of boxes for his supporters. A very strong economy, conservative policies, conservative judges on the Supreme Court, a pro-religion stance. But when he went down the route of peddling these conspiracy theories, talking about things that simply weren't true, and then using this inflaming rhetoric of let's march down there, let's charge, let's fight to take back our country, he really was on a losing streak there. Now, we mentioned earlier, yes, of course, there will be some people out there who will have looked at the chaos in the Capitol building and loved it and said, this is great. But one would imagine and one would hope that most of his 74 million voters were not pleased with that. I will point to some of Donald Trump's other tweets today, and of course he lost his Twitter account during the week for a period of time. They suspended him from it. He tweeted that video that you played a clip of earlier. He tweeted the words, I won't be going to the inauguration, but he sent another tweet as well earlier today. To the 75 million American patriots who voted for me, I will be a loud voice for you. I will always stand up for you. I'll always be there for you. He is certainly putting out this image right now that he's not going anywhere.
You know, Brian makes a point about ticking off these boxes, but Adolfo, I want to ask about the most recent box, which is Republicans. I mean, he went after the governor of Georgia. He went after the Secretary of State in Georgia. There's reporting that he didn't really care that Perdue and Loeffler lost their races because he didn't feel that they were loyal enough to him. What is that doing to the party?
Well, that's obviously not helpful, but it's not anything new. He is not a conventional Republican, and he does not going to put the party label first. It's going to be loyalty to the MAGA movement, to the president's movement. But I want to say something here because I think the viewers need to understand this. The clip you just ran, the vice president, or now the president-elect Biden, in my view, that's not a unifier. That's a divider. He said in the clip that you just ran, for a year now, not last week, for a year now I have been saying he's unfit and the worst president ever, okay? He's been saying that for a year, unfit. Whether you like it or not, 75 million people, half of the country, supported President Trump. So I don't think that's a unifying message. You can say, I disagree with those policies, I disagree with the style, but if you look at that, this holier-than-thou attitude by the Democrat Party, which has been divisive, has been horrific things have been said about Donald Trump for 4 years. There was an impeachment effort on the day he was inaugurated by Congressman Green that began. So you have to look at the actions of the other party that have been very much on a crusade from day one to destroy this man. And that's not lost on that 75 million people. So this isn't about Donald Trump, it's about 75 million people on how do you convince them that you understand their point of view and their grievances.
But he did say he would be honored to have Vice President Pence there, and Pence says he will be there. Talk to me about Mike Pence, because he's kind of been put in an awkward position. He's been very loyal to the president. He had to take part in this event on Wednesday, and Trump, during his speech out there on the mall, was saying how angry he was with Pence. He wants to navigate a future in the Republican Party. What does that look like?
Well, I know him well, and I absolutely think that he did the right thing, because anyone who understands the process, and I understand the president sometimes thinks that precedents can be set. I think he was given advice. I know he was given advice that the vice president exceeded his authority. It was a way to get the case before the Supreme Court. It would have been indeed the case, but it wouldn't have been about the fraud. But put that aside, the vice president did the right thing. I think the vice president's future in the party, though, is going to be difficult. He's been very much of a Trump loyalist, and now he is viewed by the Trump faction, which is where his strongest support has come, as a disloyal to the president. And I don't think that other conventional Republicans who have aspirations are now going to turn to Vice President Pence, the ones that, for example, Senator Sass and others that never supported President Trump, to put the number 2 on the ticket as the leader of our party. So I think the vice president has been, although he did the right thing, left without a political home. And I think he is destined really to be going into political oblivion.
Steve, let me ask you about Washington, how it changes on the 20th. Because of this election in Georgia, Democrats will control the House, the Senate, and the White House. How do things change? And what about Biden's unifying message? Adolfo said what he said today doesn't go very far in terms of unifying, but that has been kind of a theme that he's said over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Biden's going to continue to try to be the unifier. Adolfo makes a very good point, though, and Democrats do have to be concerned about overplaying their hand on this kind of thing. And that's one of the questions that I think people are asking about in impeachment. And how will that be received? Will that be seen as something that is continuing to fight against Trump as opposed to just moving forward? Again, Democrats feel like they're doing the right thing with that. They need to send a message. But what is the result of that in terms of how people who don't agree with Democrats look at that? But you mentioned the Senate being 50-50. You mentioned how Washington's going to change. Look, the Democrats are going to be in charge of the executive branch and both houses in the legislature. And that is going to give them immense power to at least drive the conversation, drive their policies forward. But they're going to have a 50-50 Senate, so they're not going to be able to get everything done that they want to do. They're going to have their own fights within their own party with moderates, establishment Democrats versus the left and progressives. And the things that I think passionate Democrats and especially passionate progressives are going to want to get through and expect to get through in an all-Democratic Washington, they're going to have a lot of trouble in the Senate. A 50-50 Senate, nothing's going to be automatic.
Steve, thanks so much for your observations. I want to thank all our guests. That is all the time we have, and that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Mulder in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us.